The roadside diner sat on the edge of a small, forgotten town, its neon open sign flickering faintly under a light drizzle. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of grease and stale coffee, a heavy stillness clinging to the place like a second skin. Keanu Reeves occupied the farthest booth, tucked into the shadows, his worn brown hoodie pulled low over his head, a plain black t-shirt underneath. He blended into the dimness, unnoticed by most. A cold sandwich sat untouched in front of him, its edges curling slightly, next to a coffee mug he hadn't sipped from once. His hands rested around it, steady but idle. His eyes, though, sharp, calm, and unyielding, scanned the room with quiet precision. The exits, the corners, every subtle shift in movement. This wasn't a man waiting for a meal. This was a man waiting for something else. Behind the counter, Emma moved with quick, mechanical efficiency, wiping it down with a rag that had long lost its white. Barely 20, her faded uniform hung loose on her thin frame, her shoulders tight as if braced for impact. Her eyes flicked to the door every few seconds, not with hope, but with dread. A silent plea etched into her tense expression. She didn't speak much, didn't need to. The way her fingers gripped the counter, knuckles pale against the chipped surface, said everything. Keanu noticed. He'd spent years reading people, picking up the signs of trouble before it struck. Emma's fear wasn't loud, but it was deep, the kind that whispered, "Not tonight. Please, not again." The other patrons barely registered her tension. Sam, a trucker in a low-slung cap, hunched over a plate of fries at the counter, chewing slowly, his world reduced to the next bite. He didn't look up, didn't care, or maybe didn't want to. Near the window, Henry, an old man in a flannel shirt, flipped through a newspaper he'd likely read a dozen times. His glasses slid down his nose, but his focus stayed locked on the faded print, a shield against whatever loomed outside. The clink of Sam's fork and the mournful hum of the jukebox were the only sounds breaking the quiet. No one spoke, no one connected. It was a room full of people pretending everything was fine even when it wasn't. Keanu's grip tightened slightly on his mug, a faint shift most wouldn't catch. He knew this kind of silence. It was fragile, temporary, the calm before chaos. Emma grabbed a stack of napkins, her hands trembling just enough to betray her. She didn't look at him, didn't look at anyone, just kept moving. But Keanu saw it all. The way her breath hitched, the way her gaze darted to the door again, faster now. He'd seen that look too many times, on faces too scared to ask for help, too broken to expect it. Something was coming, and he felt it in his bones. The diner's fragile quiet shattered as the door slammed open, the bell above it shrieking like a wounded animal. 5 men stormed in, their heavy boots pounding the tile, water dripping from their leather jackets in dark, uneven streaks. The stench of gasoline and cheap whiskey hit the air hard, a sour wave that turned the room's stale warmth into something suffocating. They didn't just enter, they claimed it, their presence a fist closing around the space, squeezing out every ounce of safety. Emma's shoulders jerked, her rag freezing mid-swipe. Sam's fork hovered over his fries. Henry's fingers tightened on his newspaper, the crinkle loud in the sudden hush. Keanu didn't flinch, but his hand slid from the mug to the table, a slow, deliberate shift that carried weight. Leading them was Vince Iron Tooth Carter, a towering figure with a presence that sucked the light from the room. His black hair hung in wet, tangled clumps, framing a face carved from cold stone. When he grinned, a glint of metal flashed, a single iron tooth catching the neon glow, a badge of menace. His eyes, flat and unfeeling, swept the diner like a predator sizing up prey, landing on Emma with a hunger that made her breath catch. His voice rumbled low, thick with threat, as he stepped toward the counter. "Evening, darling. What do you got for me tonight?" It wasn't a question. It was a demand, wrapped in a smile that promised pain if she failed to deliver. The words hung there, heavy, daring her to defy him. Emma's hands trembled, her voice barely a whisper as she forced it out. I don't have it. No money tonight." Her eyes dropped, unable to meet his, her body shrinking as if she could disappear into the counter. She wasn't lying. The diner was a husk, its cash drawer as empty as the town's hope. But Vince didn't care about truth. He thrived on power, on the way fear bent people to his will. His grin widened, cruel and slow, and he let the silence stretch, a torturous pause that pressed down on her like a physical weight. She gripped the counter harder, her knuckles whitening, her last anchor in a world tilting toward chaos. Behind him, his crew fanned out, each a shadow of his malice. Tommy, lanky and wiry, leaned against a booth, his crooked smile twitching as he drummed his fingers on the table, a restless, mocking rhythm. Bruno, broad and hulking, cracked his knuckles, the sounds sharp and deliberate, his fists itching for a target. Leo's wild eyes darted around, his hand hovering near his jacket where a dagger waited, its promise glinting in his stare. Max lingered by the door, his bulk filling the frame, his loyalty to Vince warring with a flicker of hesitation. Together, they were a wall of menace, a storm ready to break over anyone too weak to stand. Vince stepped closer, his boots thudding with purpose, his shadow swallowing Emma whole. "No money, huh?" he said, his tone dripping with fake pity. "That's a shame. You know what happens when you come up short?" His hand hovered near her wrist, not touching yet, but close enough to make her flinch, a small, broken sound escaping her throat. It was the sound of someone who'd been here before, who'd learned that resistance only sharpened the blade. Her eyes flicked to the door again, not for escape, but for the memory of nights when no one came, when the bruises lingered longer than the shame. Sam stared at his plate, his jaw locked, the fries suddenly a lifeline he couldn't let go. Henry's hands shook, the newspaper creasing under his grip, but he kept his head down, a silent prayer to be left unseen. The jukebox droned on, its sad tune a cruel backdrop to the terror unfolding. No one moved, no one spoke. Evil didn't need permission. It thrived in their silence, fed on their refusal to look up. Emma's chest heaved, her breath shallow, her world narrowing to Vince's looming figure and the inevitability of his next move. Keanu watched it all, his calm a stark contrast to the rising panic. His fingers rested lightly on the table now, no longer curled around the mug. It was a small change, but it carried the weight of a decision forming, a line being drawn. He'd seen this before. Bullies who ruled through fear, who counted on good people staying quiet. Emma's flinch, her choked whimper, hit him like a spark igniting something deep, something he'd buried under years of restraint. He didn't move yet. He didn't need to. But the air around him shifted, heavy with the promise of what was coming. Vince's hand shot forward, his fingers brushing Emma's wrist, and she yanked back, a desperate, broken whimper slipping from her lips. It was a sound that cut deeper than words, a raw, helpless plea from someone who'd stopped believing rescue was possible. The diner trembled under the weight of it. But Vince's crew erupted in laughter, a harsh, guttural roar that rolled through the room like a taunt. They fed on her fear, reveled in it, their voices a cruel chorus that drowned out the jukebox's fading tune. Emma's eyes squeezed shut, her body curling inward as if she could shield herself from the inevitable. But then, a quieter sound pierced the chaos, the soft scrape of a booth seat shifting. Keanu Reeves stood up. It wasn't a rush, wasn't a shout, just a slow, deliberate rise, his hoodie slipping slightly as he straightened. Yet it was enough. Every head turned, every breath caught. His presence filled the space, not with noise, but with something heavier, something unshakable. Vince's laughter died mid-breath, his hands still hovering where Emma had been. Sam's fork clattered to his plate, a sharp clang in the stillness. Henry's newspaper slipped an inch, his trembling fingers betraying him. Emma's eyes snapped open, wide and disbelieving, a flicker of something fragile igniting in them. Hope, maybe, or just the shock of someone finally moving when no one ever had. Vince turned, slow and deliberate, his iron-toothed grin twisting into a sneer. "Who the hell are you to butt into my business?" he spat, his voice thick with mockery, daring Keanu to prove he was more than a shadow in a hoodie. Keanu met his gaze unflinching, his own voice low and steady, slicing through the tension like a blade. Let her go. It wasn't a request, it was a warning, cold and final, carrying the weight of a man who'd seen too much to back down. Vince barked a laugh, loud and hollow, and lunged forward, his meaty hand aiming to shove Keanu back into obscurity. But Keanu moved, smooth, almost effortless, sidestepping just enough, his hand snapping up to catch Vince's wrist mid-air. With a flick of motion, he twisted, sharp and precise, using Vince's own force against him. A grunt tore from Vince's throat as he stumbled, crashing into the counter with a thud that rattled the shelves. Glass rattled, a plate shattered, the air exhaled chaos. Tommy reacted first, his lanky frame lunging with a wild, clumsy swing aimed at Keanu's head. Fear masked as fury drove him, but Keanu didn't flinch. He ducked under the punch, grabbing Tommy's arm as it sailed past, wrenching it back with a snap. A quick kick to the knee sent Tommy crumpling to the floor, a choked cry spilling out as he clutched his leg. Bruno roared next, his massive frame charging forward, a chair hoisted like a weapon. The room shrank under his rage, but Keanu turned into it, fearless. He caught the chair mid-swing, hands firm, yanking it hard. Bruno's eyes bulged as he lost balance, and Keanu drove an elbow into his jaw. Bone cracked. A spray of spit hit the air, and Bruno collapsed, the chair clattering beside him like a fallen flag. Leo's wild eyes flared, his hand diving into his jacket. The click of a switchblade echoed, sharp and deadly, the steel glinting as he thrust it toward Keanu's chest. Emma gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, the sound a stab of terror in the fray. Keanu released his grip on the chair, twisting sideways, the blade slicing nothing but air. He seized Leo's wrist mid-strike, slamming it down onto the nearest table with a crack that snapped the knife. It skittered across the tile as Keanu's boot drove into Leo's shinbone gave way, and Leo dropped, a howl of pain swallowed by the chaos. Max, still by the door, froze, his bravado crumbling as his crew fell one by one. His hesitation broke, and he bolted, shoving past a table, disappearing into the rain-soaked night like a shadow fleeing the light. Vince scrambled up from the counter, his face flushed red with rage, blood trickling from a split lip. "You bastard!" he snarled, charging again, fists swinging with reckless fury. Keanu met him head-on, deflecting one punch with a forearm, then another, his movements a blur of instinct and control. He caught Vince's arm mid-strike, twisted it behind his back with a fluid snap, and slammed him face-first into a table. Wood groaned under the impact, Vince's breath wheezing out in a ragged gasp. He thrashed, spitting curses, but Keanu's grip was iron, unyielding. "Enough," Keanu said, his voice cold as steel, each syllable a hammer striking stone. Vince growled, a trapped animal's defiance, but his strength bled out, his body sagging against the table, powerless. The diner fell silent save for Vince's labored breathing and the faint hum of the jukebox. Emma stood frozen, tears welling but not falling, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Sam stared, mouth agape, his fries forgotten. Henry's newspaper hit the floor, his glasses fogged with shock. The air was thick with the weight of what had just happened. Chairs overturned, blood streaking the tile, a reign of terror dismantled in minutes. Keanu didn't gloat, didn't relax. He held Vince there, his calm a stark contrast to the wreckage around him. This wasn't about strength, it was about courage. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't hesitate, just acts when the world turns away. Emma's shoulders lifted, just a fraction, her breath steadying. Something had cracked open, not just the silence, but the fear that had chained her for too long. Keanu had lit the spark, and the fire was only beginning. The diner's air hung heavy, thick with the aftermath of violence, shattered glass glinting under the flickering neon, blood smeared across the tile, the jukebox's faint hum a ghostly echo in the wreckage. Vince groaned, pinned against the table, his defiance reduced to ragged breaths under Keanu's unrelenting grip. Emma stood behind the counter, her hands trembling but her eyes steady. Tears glistening like fragile stars she refused to let fall. Sam's jaw hung slack, his fries a forgotten pile. Henry's newspaper lay crumpled at his feet, his glasses fogged with the shock of a world turned upside down. Then, through the drizzle outside, red and blue light sliced the darkness, a sudden pulse of authority cutting through the chaos. Sirens wailed, growing louder until tires screeched on wet pavement. The door burst open and two deputies stormed in, hands on holsters, their voices sharp and commanding. "Hands up," one barked, his eyes darting across the scene. Chairs toppled, bodies sprawled, a battlefield frozen in time. But the fight was over. Max, who'd fled moments ago, stumbled back inside, shoved by a deputy's firm grip, his wrists already cuffed, his face pale with defeat. A third figure followed, broad-shouldered and deliberate, her silver-streaked hair catching the neon glow. Sheriff Nora stepped into the diner, her badge glinting, her face etched with the weariness of someone who'd seen too much yet still carried the weight of duty. She surveyed the carnage, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Well, damn," she muttered, rubbing the back of her neck. "What a mess." Her gaze landed on Vince, still pinned by Keanu, and recognition flashed in her tired eyes. "Carter," she said, her voice low and hard. "You again. I told you to stay the hell out of my town." Vince spat blood onto the floor, his iron-toothed grin twisting into a weak, defiant smirk. "You can't touch me, Nora," he rasped, his bravado a thin veneer over the pain. She didn't flinch, just nodded to the deputies. They moved in, yanking Vince's arms behind his back, the metallic clank of cuffs snapping shut a punctuation to his fall. Tommy whimpered as they hauled him up. Bruno groaned, and Leo cursed through gritted teeth, each dragged out like broken pieces of a shattered myth. Keanu stepped back, his calm unbroken, giving the law room to work. Nora turned to Emma, her tone softening but firm. "They've been at you again, haven't they?" Emma nodded, a small, tight movement, her chin lifting just enough to show a spark of resolve. "Months," she said, her voice trembling but steadying with each word. "I want to press charges." The declaration landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the room. Vince's head snapped up, his face twisting into a snarl. "You little—" Nora cut him off, shoving him toward the door with a force that belied her years. "Save it, Carter," she snapped. Emma didn't waver, her hands unclenching, her breath evening out. Something had shifted in her, fear still lingered, but it no longer owned her. Sam blinked, stunned, a flicker of respect in his eyes. Henry nodded faintly, a quiet acknowledgement of courage reborn. Nora's attention shifted to Keanu, her gaze narrowing as she studied him, his worn hoodie, his steady stance, the ease with which he'd dismantled 5 men. "You," she said, tilting her head. "Who are you? Regular folks don't move like that." Keanu met her eyes, his expression unreadable, his voice flat but heavy with truth. "I was a soldier once. Now I'm just passing through. But I know these guys, Carter and his crew. They're not just here. They've been hitting towns all over, extorting, stealing, breaking people." He paused, letting the weight settle. "I've been tracking them for weeks. This wasn't random." His words hung there, a quiet revelation that turned the night's chaos into something bigger, something deliberate. Nora's brow furrowed, a mix of curiosity and unease flickering across her face. She stepped closer, lowering her voice, her exhaustion giving way to a sharper edge. "You're telling me you hunted them down, alone?" Keanu shrugged, hands slipping into his pockets. "Someone had to." The simplicity of it stung. Raw, honest, a mirror held up to every time Nora had let the system falter. Every time she'd told herself small towns like this were too far gone to save. She sighed, a sound heavy with years of compromise, then glanced back at Vince, who was being shoved into a cruiser outside. "Carter's more than a thug," she said, her tone shifting, a crack of something unexpected breaking through. "He used to run with a bigger fish, some kingpin who vanished a few years back. Word is, Carter knows things. Too much, maybe." Vince's head jerked up at her words, his bravado evaporating. His face paled, the blood and sweat streaking his skin suddenly stark against the fear in his eyes. "You don't know what you're stirring up, Nora," he hissed, his voice cracking, no longer a threat but a plea. The deputies paused, exchanging a glance, but Nora waved them on, her jaw tightening. "Get him out of here," she ordered, her mind already racing. Keanu's eyes narrowed, catching the shift. Vince wasn't just a bully, he was a loose end, a man with secrets that could unravel more than this diner's nightmare. Emma watched, her fists tightening again, sensing the undercurrent she couldn't yet grasp. Nora turned back to Keanu, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You didn't just stop a shakedown, did you? You kicked a hornet's nest." Keanu didn't blink. "Maybe," he said, his tone even, unflappable. but nests don't fall unless someone shakes them. His words landed soft but heavy, a truth that cut through the diner's lingering fear. Nora stared at him, processing, then nodded slowly, a flicker of resolve hardening her gaze. Guess we've been letting them buzz too long. That changes tonight. The deputies hauled the last of the crew outside, their boots scraping the tile, their power reduced to handcuffs and shame. Emma's shoulders straightened, her breath calmer, the weight of her choice settling into something solid. Sam muttered under his breath, "About damn time," while Henry adjusted his glasses, his silence breaking into a faint, approving hum. Keanu lingered, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm's wake. This wasn't over. Not yet. Vince's fear, Nora's revelation, Keanu's purpose. They wove a thread far darker than a simple brawl. Something bigger loomed, and the diner, once a tomb of silence, was now the spark of its undoing. Evil hadn't just been challenged, it had been exposed, and the echoes would reach further than anyone could see. The last police cruiser idled outside, its lights painting the diner's cracked windows in fleeting streaks of red and blue. Vince stumbled as the deputies shoved him toward the vehicle, his wrists bound, his iron-toothed sneer replaced by a grimace of pain and desperation. The air inside still buzzed with the weight of what had happened. Shattered chairs, blood-streaked tiles, the faint hum of the jukebox, a stubborn survivor of the chaos. Emma stood behind the counter, her hands clenched, her eyes locked on the floor as if it could swallow the tension radiating from her. Keanu lingered near the door, his hoodie shadowing his face, his calm a quiet anchor. Nora adjusted her stance, her silver hair glinting as she barked an order to her team. Then, Vince's voice cut through the night, raw and jagged, stopping everyone cold. "You think I'm the only bad guy here, Reeves?" he shouted, twisting against the deputy's grip, his bloodshot eyes darting to Emma. "Ask her what she's done." The words exploded into the diner like a grenade, splintering the fragile calm. Emma's head snapped up, her face draining of color, her hands trembling so violently she dropped the rag she'd been clutching. Sam's mouth fell open, his fries forgotten once more. Henry's glasses slipped further down his nose, his breath catching. Nora's hand froze on her radio, her gaze swinging between Vince and Emma. Keanu turned, slow and deliberate, his eyes narrowing not with anger, but with a piercing clarity that pinned Emma where she stood. The room held its breath, the silence suffocating. Emma's lips parted, but no sound came, her chest heaving as Nora stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "What's he talking about, Emma?" The question wasn't an accusation, not yet, but it carried the weight of a reckoning. Keanu didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her, his steady gaze a lifeline or a judgment, depending on what came next. Emma's knees buckled slightly, and she gripped the counter, tears spilling down her cheeks as the dam broke. "I worked for him," she whispered, her voice cracking like glass. "I wasn't just a victim, I collected for him, money, debts. I didn't want to, but I was scared, trapped. I've been trying to get out." Her confession hung there, raw and trembling, a wound laid bare. Sam shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting away. Henry's hands shook, his newspaper long forgotten. Nora's jaw tightened, processing, while Vince's bitter laugh echoed from outside, a cruel punctuation to Emma's unraveling. "Tonight," she continued, her voice steadier now, though tears streaked her face, "I was supposed to hand over the last of it, cash I'd saved to buy my way free. Then she nodded toward Keanu. "He showed up and it all fell apart." Her eyes met Keanu's, pleading, terrified, but holding a flicker of something defiant, something that refused to break completely. Keanu stepped forward, his boots soft on the tile, his voice low and even, cutting through her fear. "Why didn't you say anything?" It wasn't anger, just a question, simple and direct, laced with a quiet weight that made her flinch. She swiped at her tears, her breath hitching. "I thought no one would believe me, that I could change, that I could be more than what I'd done." Her words trembled, a fragile hope wrapped in shame, and for a moment the diner felt smaller, the walls closing in on her truth. Keanu studied her, his expression unreadable, then gave a faint nod. "You still can," he said, his tone steady, final, "if you choose it." Nora exhaled, a sound heavy with decision, and holstered her radio. "She's not wrong about one thing," she said, glancing at Vince's retreating figure. "Carter's spilling his guts out there, panicked, cutting a deal. Names, places, a whole damn network bigger than we thought. He's not just a thug, he's a thread in something uglier." She turned to Emma, her eyes softening but resolute. "You're not off the hook, but you're not under arrest. Not yet. You testify, you help us pull this apart, and we'll get you into protection. That's your shot." Emma blinked, stunned, the lifeline sinking in. Vince's shouts faded as the cruiser door slammed, his fate sealed by his own fear. Keanu reached into his pocket, pulling out a scrap of paper, worn, folded, with a number scrawled in pen. He slid it across the counter to Emma, his voice low. "If you need me, call." She took it, her fingers brushing his, the paper trembling in her grasp like a promise she wasn't sure she deserved. He turned to leave, pushing the door open, the bell chiming faintly as rain misted through. He paused, glancing back, not just at her, but at Nora, Sam, Henry, the diner itself. "Keep going," he said, his words a quiet command, then stepped into the night, swallowed by the shadows. Days later, the town reeled. Vince's confession unraveled a web of crime. Extortion rings, dirty money, names that reached beyond the county line. Emma became a key, her testimony a torch lighting the dark corners she'd once feared. She didn't call Keanu, didn't need to, not yet. She stood taller, her voice stronger, her past a scar she was learning to carry. The diner transformed, not just patched glass, but a gathering place, where people spoke up, watched out, refused to bow again. Sam started a patrol group, his gruff exterior hiding a newfound purpose. Henry wrote letters, his shaky hands steadying with every word. Keanu was gone, a whisper on the wind, but his story spread, not as a hero in a cape, but as a man who'd walked through, struck a match, and trusted others to fan the flame. The town didn't just escape Vince, it woke up, found its pulse, and beat back the shadows. Evil fell, not with a single blow, but with a choice, Emma's, Nora's, a community's, to rise from the ashes of silence. And that, more than any fight, was the legacy he left behind. Weeks passed, and the town began to breathe again, its pulse quickening where silence once reigned. The diner, once a hollow shell of cracked vinyl and flickering lights, became a beacon, its windows mended, its tables filled with voices that no longer whispered in fear. The people didn't just repair the damage, they rebuilt their spirit, stitching together a community that had unraveled under the weight of men like Vince. Emma stood at the heart of it, no longer the trembling girl behind the counter. She led a group now, quietly, fiercely, offering a hand to those who'd walked her path, trapped by choices they couldn't unmake. Her uniform was still faded, her frame still slight, but her eyes carried a fire, a strength forged in the night she'd faced her past and chosen to step beyond it. The town didn't forget her confession, they embraced it, seeing in her a mirror of their own quiet redemption. Keanu was long gone, his shadow faded from the highway, his name a murmur on the lips of those who'd witnessed his stand. He hadn't stayed for applause, hadn't sought a spotlight, he never did. But his presence lingered, not in headlines or statues, but in the cracks he'd opened, the courage he'd sparked. Sam traded his trucker's cap for a flashlight, patrolling the streets with a gruff determination that surprised even him. Henry's letters filled the local paper, his shaky script calling out corruption with a clarity he'd buried for years. The diner's jukebox played brighter tunes, the mournful hum replaced by songs that dared to hope. Keanu hadn't just beaten back a gang. He'd planted a seed, trusted it to grow in hands that had forgotten how to fight. His legacy wasn't in the fists he'd thrown, but in the hearts he'd stirred. Proof that one man's resolve could ripple through a town and wake it from a long, fearful sleep. The message of that night settled deep, a truth as simple as it was profound. Courage isn't a grand victory, a cape fluttering in the wind or a name etched in stone. It's the small, steady choice to act when the world holds its breath, when fear whispers to stay still. Keanu's stand, Emma's confession, Nora's resolve, they were dominoes, each tipping the next, until a town rose from its knees. No one saw it coming, that cascade of change from a single spark. But that's the beauty of it. The smallest push at the right moment can topple giants. Evil thrives in silence, but it crumbles when one voice, then another, then many, dares to break it. Keanu didn't save them alone. He showed them they could save themselves. And in that, the audience finds a call to stand, to speak, to trust that even the tiniest flame can light a fire no darkness can outlast. What hits me hardest about this story isn't just Keanu's quiet bravery, it's how one moment flipped everything. I see it as proof that real change doesn't need a hero in a spotlight. It starts with someone refusing to look away. Emma's turnaround, the town's awakening, it all hinges on that single stand. Some might argue Keanu overstepped, that vigilantes risk chaos when the system's already shaky. I get that law's slow for a reason. But to me, sometimes it takes a jolt like this to shake people awake, to remind them they're not powerless. What do you think? Can one person's defiance really rewrite a community's story, or is it just a fleeting flare? Thanks for sticking with us. Drop your take below, hit subscribe, and join us next time for more stories that spark feeling, thought, and maybe a little debate.